Hello, everyone. This is going to be a demonstration of the many uses of astrology through a presentation, which I've done publicly and I've also written about, but I thought it'd be nice to have a video. So what I want to do is actually show you all the different ways that astrology can be utilized. It's going to be probably a bit of a long video, and I'm going to try to cover all of it without going into too much detail. That could be part of a series of individual videos, but I really want to just show you the breadth of what's possible with astrology. So let's get into taking a look at what is actually possible. So to begin with, there are a number of different approaches to astrology, natal astrology being the starting point, the birth chart. There's something we call synastry, which is astrology looking at relationships. So this is two charts together, two individuals and their charts and how those charts interact. Astrocartography, which is location and relocation astrology, something I do quite a bit of professionally. A lot of people contact me about locations for living or for travel, and it's the most testable form of astrology. Electional astrology is what we do when we're selecting the timing of events. This might be when's the best time for your wedding, or when's the best time to do a grand opening for your business. Mundane astrology looks at interpreting world events. So when something happens out in the world that has an impact on the public dynamic, we can take a look at that astrologically and go, well, what's going on? What might be the reasons for that? What might it mean for a country or for a population of a country? Predictive astrology is, of course, looking into the future. Things are mapped out because the solar system is cyclical and things come back around to the positions they were in throughout time, and we can identify what they're going to be doing across someone's chart, how they're going to be applying to them, creating possibilities, probabilities, and possible outcomes that they need to be aware of. Medical astrology actually has a pretty rich history in the astrological practice, and it does involve kind of looking at the chart through a certain set of lenses to try to think about how health would be interpreted from an astrological perspective. And then Horary astrology is a specific technique asking questions and then casting a chart for the moment and the location of the question to find out how astrology provides the answer. So let's jump in here and look at a natal chart. This is a natal chart here, and it's cast for the day and time and location of one's birth. It is actually made up of 4 pieces of data, and I'm actually going to identify those here. You have the points themselves, which are these glyphs going around the circle, each one of them representing something different about human character. You have the signs of the zodiac. I'm circling the moon here as one of the points. Signs of the zodiac are between the degrees and the minutes. In this case, the moon is in the sign of Taurus for this individual. And then there are 12 segments called houses representing different areas of life. And the signs of the zodiac give a quality of energy. The houses of the zodiac give a location area-wise in terms of activity. And the 11th house deals with community. And then the lines on the inside are called aspect lines, and they create a circuit board, which shows how the energy dynamically interacts between points. And each of the lines has a different value. The red line with the square is a challenge. The blue line with the triangle is energy that's flowing. The long bronze or gold lines are oppositions. They are balancing one another. The shorter blue lines, they're called sextiles. They represent complementary energy, also flowing. And then the dashed green lines represent energy that is what we call inconjunct. They are somewhat incongruent and force, again, growth and challenge for the individual. So those are all put together for us to do interpretations of the entire chart, which I'll show you later when I show you what I do with a chart that I'm preparing for a client. Now, also associated with the natal chart is what's called the solar return. This is a chart that's cast for the moment that the sun returns to the same degree it was at the time of birth. So when the sun returns to 25 degrees and 52 minutes of Aries, that's when the solar return is cast for each year. Sometimes that's the day before, sometimes that's the day of, sometimes it's the day after the birthday, but it's always going to be cast for that location of the sun, not based on the time. Now, what this chart has done or used for, what it does do is provides us a look at the year ahead. So when people ask me after they've got a natal chart reading, what chart reading should they consider getting going forward, I always say at the minimum, have your solar return done once a year. It lets us know what to look for in the upcoming year. In the case of this individual, because the sun and all of these other points are in the 4th house, I can tell them that the year coming up is going to involve family. It's going to be a very important year around family. Now, besides the solar return, there's also a timing chart called transits. The natal chart is here represented on the inside, and the outer ring is where the points are today, October 2nd, 2024. So if a child happened to be born today, Saturn would be in the sign of Pisces for that child. Now, what this shows us as astrologers is where the points are moving and how fast they're moving over the chart of the individual. So in the case of the Saturn, it is moving through the 9th house, headed towards the 10th house. Saturn represents discipline and structure. It spends about 2.5 years in a sign before it moves to the next sign. So because it's moving through the 9th house, which deals with, it deals with beliefs, developing yourself and determining mastery of knowledge, and also travel. So this would be a great year for this individual to be working on developing themselves professionally, taking classes, going back to school. Maybe part of it would be actually traveling somewhere with the intent that it's going to be tied to their profession because of Saturn being involved. So this is a way of just understanding movement through the sky and how it applies to the chart. So this is a timing energy that's important for helping people understand what's going on energetically in their lives for any particular time and for a certain amount of time. Now, the next chart that's cast, also a timing chart, is called a progress chart. This is done using a special calculation, and I'm not going to really go into the details here, but simply to say that it is a chart for the evolution of the individual. So on the left-hand side, we have the natal chart, and when the person was born, their sun was in Aries, and over time, a certain number of days equal to a certain number of years, the sun has progressed into Gemini, where it is currently for the individual, which means that their evolution is developing communication and has been for the last 16 years. And for the next 14 years, that will continue. Now, all of the other points move at different speeds, so they will advance in different ways. But the progress chart stands alone as a chart letting us know where the individual has evolved and what does that evolution look like in relation to the natal chart. So once again, we've got some timing to understand how the person's developing and what they can expect energetically. Now, the next chart that I look at with regard to birth charts is something called a declination chart or highest values chart. Now, this is based on the work of the Magi Society, who wrote a book called Astrology Really Works. Kind of an appropriate title, I think. And what this involves is bringing back in the three-dimensional aspect of the solar system that's eliminated by this flat chart. So the scale over here, called the declination scale, is based on the solar ecliptic and where the points were either north or south of the solar ecliptic at the time of birth, and which ones were furthest away, highest up on the scale, represent the highest values. So in the case of this example, Ceres is the symbol here at the top of the scale, and it represents nourishment. And here in the chart, it is in the 2nd house, which deals with getting one's needs met. And by being in Leo, that is done through performance, leadership, and basically getting attention, doing something where you're the lead of the story or the lead performer. So this gives an extra layer of information that is lost when we only look at the chart in its flat two-dimensional representation. When I do this chart in a reading, I look at the top 3 points, which I'll show you in another slide here. So when actually working with clients, what I do is I have a comprehensive reading. I can do it in segments. I can do just the birth chart, but the comprehensive reading involves the birth chart, and these are the notes that I provide ahead of a session that I do with clients. So I go through and I actually write up what each of these points in combination or individually represent and how they play out in the segments of the chart, and with an understanding of what's going on with the circuit board inside. So this is a chart you would receive from me ahead of a reading that we would do. Here is that same chart and with the notations about those top 3 values. What do they represent? How do they apply? What's their importance? And then the timing chart, this is a 3-wheel chart where the inner wheel is the natal chart. The second ring is the progress chart. Specifically, though, it deals with the inner points because of their speed. As an example, the moon moves through a sign every 2.5 days. But when we run the calculation using progressions, it slows it down to 2.5 years, which is much more useful when trying to talk about what's going on with someone's moon energy or their emotional state or their soul path work. The outermost ring is the transits, once again, eliminating the inner points that move quickly and focusing on the outer points where the duration is long enough for us to take note and say something useful over a longer period of time. As you can see, I note here the years of activity that the transits actually and the progressions will play out in terms of this timing chart. So if you decide to get a comprehensive reading from me, these 3 charts are what I will send you with my notations. Again, this can be broken down into smaller segments depending on, of course, how much information you want or your budget. Now, synastry, the next form of astrology is relationship astrology. And this is where we compare 2 charts. So the inner wheel is an individual, the outer wheel is an individual. What we're considering is how does the person on the outside influence the person on the inside? And then, of course, we switch that and we look at it in reverse, where the person on the inside goes to the outside and how do they influence the person. So we'll take into account the position of the points on the outer ring and where they're applying and how they're interacting with the points of the individual on the inner ring. So here is individual 1 and individual 2, and then here is individual 2 on the inside and individual 1 on the outside. Now, a third part of the charts, and again, when doing a reading for people that are asking whether it's a relationship that's romantic or it's familial or it's friendships or employer-employee, whatever it might be, there's also a chart that's created between the 2 people that's called a combined or a composite chart. And this is done using the midpoints between the same points. So the sun on one chart, sun on the other chart, where's the midpoint between the 2? That becomes the composite chart sun sign for the couple. We'll just use couple as a way of describing, or for the relationship as an entity. Now, this has its own value. This lets me know, hey, when these people are together, this is what energy they create. These are the areas of life where activity takes place, so forth and so on. Now, the final 2 charts are, well, what happens when we take the combined chart, the composite chart, and apply it to each of the individuals? So this gives us, again, an understanding of not only how are the 2 people relating to one another, what do they create by being together, and then how does their togetherness affect each of them individually? So this is the essential process of using synastry. And here again, we have the second individual on the inside and the couple or the combined chart on the outside. Astrocartography. This is location and relocation astrology, and it's done using maps as well as relocated charts. The maps are based on the birth location and where the energy spreads out, as well as how moving locations affects the angles within the chart, which are these vertical lines, which have a symbol for a point, and then one of the angle letters, which is AS for the ascendant, DS for the descendant, MC for the medium Celi or midheaven, and IC for the Emnium Celi. And this is someone's map, which lets me know if I have them travel to a certain location that's outside of their birth location, there's going to be certain very distinct ways in which energy is going to affect them. And this is great for trying to locate a place to move to, or if you're traveling, what you can expect, or if you are required to move somewhere, what that represents. And when doing astrocartography for more than one individual, especially a family, it's important to have everyone's information to find out if one location is going to work for one person, but not going to work for another person. So this is just looking at the US map. These lines go all the way around the world. We can look globally for opportunities for location and relocation. Now, I decided to drill down here to the state of Georgia, and you can see here now that the relationship between the points and those angles has one of the symbols in the middle that represents an aspect. And generally speaking, the triangle aspect is where energy is flowing. The square aspect is where there is some challenge to the energy. The aspect that represents a conjunction is a circle with a dash in it. There aren't any in this location. That represents where energy is merging. So now we get a little more granular, and we can say, well, if you were to move to Georgia, where would be a good location in terms of strength of energy? So Dalton, Georgia, in the northern part of the state, as well as Albany, or Valdosta down in the bottom part of the state, would be very good locations, energetically speaking. South Augusta, however, has a green line running to the west that has that square energy in it, which represents a potential challenge and probably would not be a location that I would suggest someone go to if they have a choice. If they don't have a choice, then I would explain to them what this line is likely to represent and how it would affect them by being there. Now, not only is it important to know the map, but what happens when you relocate? So when you actually relocate from the position, so this person was born in Sedona, but they relocate to Atlanta, then the chart changes somewhat based on that relocation. And we would want to look at what it means for them to be in that place astrologically. And the calculation is done by using the date and time that are the birth date and time, but with the new location. Now, electional astrology is when we're trying to find out about the timing of events. We're going to get married. What's a good day for our wedding? What's going on in the sky? And how does that apply to us in terms of a wedding date? And what would happen is casting the chart for the wedding itself, but then also casting charts for the individuals in the wedding and how that date would apply to them in the same way that we would look at the composite chart from the Synastry reading for each individual. So here's a chart cast for a wedding. And what would I say about this is that the sun and the moon, it's a new moon on the day of the wedding. It also happens to be the eclipse because I chose today's date. The 10th house means that it's going to be, public. It's something where you really do want the sun, if possible, to be high in the sky because it represents the best representation of that energy of the sun, which is to be shining on the couple. Now, I also cast a chart for a grand opening of a business a little bit earlier in the day, 9 a.m. What's going on? This chart would tell me what I would suggest about this date if this date were selected as a grand opening date for a business. So it happens that this is a full moon date. I can show you actually rather quickly. I can go back and show you that a new moon is actually represented by the sun and the moon being next to each other, but that the new moon is at a higher minute than the sun. So the sun is 10 degrees, 4 minutes. The moon here is at 10 degrees and 9 minutes. So it's in the new moon phase. The full moon is represented by the sun and the moon being opposite one another. In this case, just again, to make it a little bit easier to spot, this would be where the sun is here and directly opposite it is the moon. So the sun at 24 degrees, the moon at 25 degrees. This is a full moon, which for opening a business would probably be a good day to activate that energy of the fullness of the moon and it representing a completion or something reaching its highest value or highest energy. So this is how the electional energy or electional astrology would work. And then we have mundane astrology, which is taking a look at world's events. What I selected here is a world event that I looked at for an article that I wrote for AskAstrology.com, and that is Trump's assassination attempt back on July 13th. Now, as a standalone chart, it may not necessarily reveal anything except that this was the date that it was marked. So what becomes important for world events is what is it being applied to? And in the case of Trump being a presidential candidate, of course, we want to look at this in terms of his chart. And there was something that really did stand out from an astrological standpoint that I will point out. So on that day, Mars, which is the god of war, and Uranus, which is a breakthrough or an unexpected energy, they were merged together in Capricorn, and they were forming an actual square with his natal Mars and ascendant. So a Mars square Mars, that's volatility. And the ascendant with the Uranian energy is something surprising happening to the individual. So from an astrological standpoint, we can see how the astrology would line up. Now, how would you use this in a practical way is if the Trump camp had an astrologer on hand, I would hope that when they were looking at this, they would say to, you know, hey, be aware that this is going to be a volatile day for this individual in some way, shape, or form. We should probably take some extra precautions. After the fact, it becomes just very clear that this was a period of time when there was going to be some very significant strain. And what's interesting for Trump is that this point Uranus is actually not going to move away from that square anytime this year. So that energy is at play for him throughout the remainder of the year. The other thing with mundane astrology that is significant is, well, how does this apply to the United States? Since Trump is a candidate, his assassination attempt would have an effect on the election, would have an effect on the United States. So this is then a look at what was going on at that time in terms of the US chart. And here again, we can see something very significant, that Uranus-Mars combination is squaring with the US moon. And so there is a volatile energy that's at play here that we saw show up in this particular attempt. Once again, going into it, what I can honestly say about just looking at anything with transits with the US chart is there's a lot going on for this country. And a lot of it is really creating tremendous upheaval. And it started, quite honestly, back in 2020 in real earnest. I mean, it's been kind of going on, but in earnest, 2020, January, when COVID kind of arrived on the scene, that was the beginning. This energy of transition that we're dealing with is really not going to begin to move through its stages of settling until we get to 2028, 2029. So there's still quite a bit of ways to go, but mundane astrology would explain that, would help us understand that. And then we can use that to figure out, well, what do we need to do with our lives? What choices do we need to make if we know that this is going to be a disruptive period and it's going to last for quite some time? Now, the next type of astrology is predictive astrology, which to some extent was probably a big part of what we call Hellenistic astrology or astrology in the Middle Ages, which was trying to predict events in terms of who would come to power, which powers would win battles, and so forth. Now, this is done using the energy of transits. And in individuals, there are 6 great transits that we all experience roughly at the same time. One of those is the Uranus opposition, which is what this is cast for. So Uranus is here at 13 degrees by transit, and the Uranus in the natal chart is at 15 degrees. So this is the beginning of a opposition that's going to last for a little over a year, because it's going to have a direct pass. It's going to retrograde, go back over it again, and then go over it a final time in terms of completing the journey and completing what needs to be done energetically. So what does the future hold at this time for this individual? Obviously, there's going to be some disruption around their career, because the 10th house is where the transit is taking place, and it's going to have a direct and opposing effect on their family in the 4th house, because that's where Uranus happens to be. So we can look at any time and see what's going on energetically and make some pretty solid predictions, maybe not to the granular level. In other words, I can't say with this Uranus moving through the 10th house, this person could get a fantastic job. That could be the surprise. They get a promotion that's outstanding. They could lose their job. Uranus is unpredictable, but what I do know is that at that time, that energy is going to be active and something's going to show up. And it's going to be about getting one's authentic self developed. And again, if you're out of alignment, Uranus opposition will absolutely force you back into alignment, and it will do it in a pretty dramatic way. But we know when that's going to be. It's going to be between 42 and 44 for all of us. And so we can look at that and say, okay, here it comes. And I can predict this with certainty that this is going to happen. What's going to happen within that, I can give you some insight about maybe how to deal with it, but your own particular story would indicate where the unexpected could come from. For example, if your story is you're married, and let's say Uranus enters your 7th house, then it could lead to a divorce. It could lead to some radical change within the relationship. If you're single, Uranus going in the 7th house could mean a sudden person comes into your life that leads to a marriage. It's going to be dependent upon where the energy is transiting and what it's doing in the chart of the individual. So that's one of the ways in which we would apply the predictive energy. Now, this also can be applied to questions involving what the future holds in terms of progressed energy. And what I wanted to show here is these are actually 2 progressed charts. On the left-hand side, it is the progress chart set for 2 a.m. on December the 2nd, 2024. And in this chart, in terms of what's going on, the ascendant is at the very end of its journey through Leo. By the afternoon, that ascendant will be in Virgo, and it changes the dynamic of the chart. So around December 2nd of 2024, there's going to be a significant shift energetically for this individual, and it's going to involve their identity going from Leo to Virgo. Leo is about performance, leadership, gaining attention. Virgo is about service, taking care of the details, being more meticulous. So one way to think about it is that while the ascendant was in Leo, this person was doing whatever they could to become well-known or to perform at a high level. But once it hits Virgo, the energy shifts down to how do I take what I've created and take care of it? How do I carefully manage the things that I have? That would be the type of energetic shift that this would represent for the individual. And again, we can predict when it's going to happen. Now, medical astrology, I'm not really, I'll show you a chart and kind of explain, but it's really based on looking at different points in specific ways. Venus is representative of the body and our connection to our health. Chiron is known as the wounded healer. Hygeia is an asteroid that I do like to use that is specific to health energy. The sixth house is our health routines and our management of our health. The first house is the physical body. The 12th house is our spiritual health. So when considering issues around health, these are the pieces that are identified and focused on, as well as point rulership. So for example, Mars rules muscles, blood, energy levels. This is all coming out of Hellenistic astrology, and it still has some value in terms of just getting people to think more thoroughly about their health situation and what they're dealing with on a health level. And then signs also have rulership. Taurus, for example, rules the throat, the neck, and the vocal cords. So based on natal energy as well as transiting energy, this branch of astrology can explain quite a bit in terms of helping someone understand health concerns, when they might be happening, how long they might endure, what areas they might be affecting. And once again, this is a type of astrology that's very testable. It either is accurate and it's providing you with useful information, or it's missing the beat. And then that means that you have to ask the question of, well, why is that? Is there something wrong with the information we have about the natal chart? Is there something that we need to address more carefully in terms of conveying information? So here is just a chart, and as an example, I'm going to just point out where Hygeia is. Hygeia is down here in the 5th house, which is one's house of creativity, leisure, what one does for enjoyment. It is in Scorpio, so this involves water energy. It was retrograde at the time of birth, so this could indicate that the health is tied to pleasure, actually. And there may be some sort of repression or suppression around this because of the retrograde energy. That means that health would be determined by how well someone is allowing themselves to enjoy themselves, also at a sexual level, because Scorpio deals with sexuality. So this would be one way of kind of talking about health and having a dialogue with a person and finding out, does this make sense? Is this something that resonates? I've been doing this a long time, and I can honestly say that most of the times people are really surprised at how accurate or how insightful the energy and the information turns out to be. So this is, again, another branch of astrology that can be explored and can take you to a deeper understanding of yourself. Now, the last one is Horary astrology, and I don't do this that often. I tend to find my challenge with Horary astrology is that it can be a little bit deterministic in the way it's designed, which is a viewpoint, and it's fine. But I tend to be much more of a free will, with there's elasticity. It's not that not that anything goes, but there is some elasticity. But here are the things that you can ask about. Just some examples, like lost items. Where are my keys? About a relationship, you could say, I want to cast a chart. Should I go on a second date? I've been out with this person. I want to know if I should go on a second date. I'm undecided. What does the chart potentially tell me? Career, I have a job offer. Should I take the job? I want to cast a chart and find out if I should. Family, I've always had trouble with my sister. What's the reason for that? Now, Synastry could also help with this as well, a lot more depth. But maybe there's a particular incident that just is like, I want to know, like right now, why can't I get along with her? Health, of course, is my health issue chronic? Is it something that's long lasting? Is it temporary? Finances, should I be conservative, more risky with my 401k? Might be an example. And legal matters, is it wise to pursue legal action over some incident? I mean, it can be any question that you want. And then the idea is that you cast a chart. Now, I've done these, and I've done it for a couple of lost items, and we found them. I mean, this is one of those things where even for myself, I'm like, whoa, that's pretty interesting. So here is a casting for where are my keys, and this is what the chart looks like. And then there's a particular way of reading the information, and you have the primary significators when something's lost, and that is the second house of material goods and your possessions, and the ascendant, which has to do with the individual that's asking the question. And then you have planetary significators for lost items, and that would be the ruler of the second house. So which sign is ruling it, which planet, and then go look where that planet happens to be, as well as the moon and Mercury, especially Mercury, because it's usually small items that it's associated with. The house meanings for the location. So for example, if, let's say, the Mercury or the moon are in a particular location house-wise, that can give us an idea of where we might need to go looking. So if we go back, we can see that both the moon and Mercury are in the 11th house, suggesting that the keys have been lost somewhere in a communal space, somewhere out in the world, or maybe at a friend's house, something of that nature, because the 11th house definitely represents friendships. And then you interpret the sign and the element clues. The moon and Mercury were in air signs, so near places of communication or in an open space. And I did this actually, I lost my wallet at one point, and I did the reading, and it directed me to go outside, and I'd left it sitting out on a table, and it had gotten dark, and I'd forgotten about it. So I didn't actually know where it was, but this actually worked. I also helped a client find, they had some medicine that they had set away because they had some children in the house. They didn't want the children to get to the medicine. They forgot where they put it. And the reading actually directed that it was in one of the public rooms up high, and she had a cabinet that she had her china in, and she had put it on top of the china cabinet and forgotten about it. So a couple of anecdotal stories where the Horary astrology actually did work. So this covers all of the different uses of astrology. It's not deeply detailed. I'll probably take the time to do individual presentations focusing in on each one of these examples, but I just wanted you to have a chance to see all the different ways, all the amazing ways that astrology can be utilized. So if you happen to be interested in what I do professionally and would like to make an appointment, here are the different ways that you can contact me. At my website, you'll find an actual form that you can fill out where you'll see all of those different forms of astrology that you can consider if you want to use one of those, like maybe an astrocartography reading. But I always recommend, no matter what you do, have that birth chart reading done if you haven't had it done as the basis for whatever else you're going to do. I'm a fan of text, so if you want to text me for an appointment, we can certainly communicate that way. And then this is my business email address. So I hope this has been interesting to you. I really have enjoyed sharing this information. And like I said, I'm hoping to make this part of a series that I develop where I look at them a little bit more in depth individually. So hopefully you have enjoyed this presentation, and take care.